Let's look at Aristotle's concept of secondary substance as a solution to Plato's third man. We can divide Aristotle's theory of substance into two parts, one for matter and one for form. The concept of primary substance brings together the idea of form, adapted from Plato's theory of forms and the Pythagorean ontology of abstract mathematical entities, and the idea of matter, which Aristotle presents as a synthesis of several different pre-Socratic materialisms. If a primary substance is form and matter, then we would expect there must at least be formal and material causes, principles, and explanations. There are many kinds of substances. In particular, there are extreme categories in Aristotle's theory that limit the range of different kinds of substance, but are not themselves substances. They either consist of pure form without matter or of pure matter without form. The extremes in the opposition of matter and form in Aristotle's thought, pure matter and pure form, systematically delimit the space in which different types of combinations of matter with form or of informed matter can be situated. The result is an comprehensive way of understanding the nature of many different types of substance from the standpoint of the distinction between primary substance's form and its matter, the distinction between its essential and accidental properties, and the concept of essence as natural function. Within this framework, we can understand the logic of Aristotle's solution to the problem of corruption and alteration and essential and merely accidental change. Aristotle introduces the concept of non-sensible substances. These are the definitions, species of things, and secondary substances that inhere in primary substances. They presumably include all non-Platonic Aristotelian forms with a small f, numbers, and shapes of every kind of property it is possible for a primary substance to have. Aristotle distinguishes the investigation of formal aspects of substances from that of sensible substances, including primary substances in the case of bodies and their parts and their material components. Let's read that in 1037a. And it is here in color blue. Another point, and let's read this one. Another point that emerges is that the soul is a primary substance. The body, matter, and man or animal, the universal composite. Moreover, Socrates and Coriscus are, if we allow the soul of Socrates also to be Socrates, not simple on the lips of some. It is the soul of Socrates and those of others, the composite individual. If, on the other hand, Socrates just is this particular soul and this particular body, then the composition of the particular will mirror that of the universal. A question that can be deferred, though not forever, is whether there is some other matter in addition to that of substances of the kinds that we have been examining, whether we should look for some other sort of substance, such as perhaps numbers. This is in any case part of our purpose in trying to frame definitions for perceptible substances. After all, it is really up to physics and second philosophy to give us a theory of perceptible substances. For the physicist can by no means be content merely with some grasp of the matter of what he studies. On the contrary, his understanding of the substance specified by the account must be, if anything, greater. Aristotle properly relegates the study of material aspects of sensible substances to what he calls here second philosophy, which is to say the natural sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, and others. This is a reasonable division of labor for Aristotle, since much of the inquiry into the matter of primary substances is naturally an appropriate subject for the specialized sciences rather than the metaphysics. He narrows the study specifically to secondary subsistent substances that, by virtue of being non-sensible, cannot be discovered by perception. He recalls that the concept of substance has already been defined in universal terms. The example of a flat nose surfaces again. He speaks of the inherent or indwelling of secondary substance, the flatness of the nose, in the material substance of the nose. As a further clarification, Aristotle now indicates that secondary substance is not a part of a primary substance in anything like the way that a finger is a part of a hand or a finger and hand are parts of a complete human body. Rather, Aristotle maintains that a secondary substance pervades a primary substance, which it defines and in which it inheres. It is literally part, but not literally any particular part of the primary substance in which it inheres, and it is metaphorically a part of the whole, distributed throughout and integrated in the formal definition of the primary substance in which it subsists and to which it belongs. Let's read this one in pink. Another issue in store concerns the way in which the content of the account constitutes parts of definitions and what it makes in case that the definition is a single account. Let's go down. In this discussion, we have stated what it was to be that thing is universally for all cases and how it is to be identified per se with itself. Why, in some instances, the account of the what it was to be that thing contains the parts of the thing defined, and in others not, and that the parts that are thus present in the account of the substance will not be present as matter, the latter not being parts of that substance, but of the composite substance, a substance to which in one way an account applies, in one way not, given that there is no account of it in conjunction with matter, which is indefinable, whereas there is an account to be had of its under specification of the primary substance, so that, for instance, the account of the soul is the account of the man. The key point is that the substance is the form dwelling in the object, and that form, the substance that is a composite of the form and of matter, is said to be substance. So concavity is a substance, the composite of which and of the nose are the snub nose and snubness, flatness, in both of which nose will be present twice, whereas a composite substance such as snub nose or callias will also contain the matter. Much of Aristotle's discussion, as you would see, is rather abstract here, that it is even difficult to follow the thread of argument from topic to topic. It is imaginable that in the course of presenting his ideas on first philosophy verbally to an audience, Aristotle might have presupposed and so not bothered to mention some of what for us is necessary background. Aristotle does not always say as much as he might to help us fully understand his assertions. Aristotle remarks that bodies of sensible things must be composed of substances and not qualities. They cannot be composed of qualities, Aristotle contends, because qualities cannot exist independently of, but can only subsist in substances. Aristotle puts the point succinctly by saying that quality, which is to say property, definition, species, or secondary substance, cannot exist prior to substance. To suppose otherwise is to pretend that a quality could have a separable subsistence independently of the existence of the substance in which it inheres or for which it is indwelling. Aristotle illustrates the point by means of a concrete example, including Socrates. He remarks that Socrates is a substance in two senses, because Socrates is first of all a primary substance in whom substance also inheres. He further re-emphasizes the fact that it is only primary substances that exist entirely in themselves. Primary substances have specific qualities, essential and accidental properties inhering in them. Aristotle commits himself to an inherence theory of secondary substance when he requires that there are no animals other than the particular animals, exemplifying the definition of the property of being an animal. More importantly, Aristotle insists that the definitions, species, or secondary substance of being an animal that subsists in the particular existent animal is to be found in the world is not itself an animal. Here we will go to a very, very long quote, and I hope you'd bear with me in this. Let's read this one in blue. It is in fact also important, again, this is page 213 of the Penguin edition and book Zeta. It is in fact also important to obtain in division the differentia of the differentia. For instance, pedestrian is a differentia of animal, and the differentia of the pedestrian animal should be an object of our knowledge, qua the animals being pedestrian. It would then be quite wrong on a proper procedure to subdivide pedestrian into winged and wingless, a feature of current practice but a mark of its ineptitude, but rather into cloven-footed and whole-footed, these being the differentiae of foot as much as being cloven-footed is a way of being pedestrian. In fact, this is how the division ought always to be prosecuted until the level of non-differentiation is reached, at which point there will be as many forms as differentiae of foot, and pedestrian animals will also be equal to them in number. If all these is on the right lines, we have a clear upshot. The last differentia will be the substance and the definition of the object. This conclusion is recommended by the consideration that superfluous repetition is to be avoided in definition. Some, such as it happens, is inevitable. To say two-footed pedestrian animal just is to say animal having feet, having 2 feet, and if the latter is in turn subjected to its own propriety division, the differentia will be mentioned more times, once for each of the differentiae of the whole division. Anyway, if differentia arises out of differentia, then one differentia, the last, will be the form and the substance, whereas if division takes place through accidental features, so that pedestrian is subdivided into white and black, then the differentiae will be equinumerous with the cats, all of which makes it clear that the definition is the account derived from the differentiae and from the last of these under a correct procedure of division. Another way of showing this would be to reverse this kind of definition. For instance, that of man to animal, bipedal, pedestrian. There's no need for pedestrian after the mention of bipedal, but the order cannot be intrinsic to the substance. What sense could be made in this context of earlier and later? Let's call this a first shot at capturing the character of definitions by division. And let's continue. I'm now on page 216. I seem to recall that substance is what we are really interested in. So let's get back to it. Well, the things that get said to be the substance are: one, substrate; two, the what it was to be that thing; and three, the composite. But also, fourth, the universal. Okay, so we have gotten through two of these, the what it was to be that thing and the substrate. Our view, remember, of the latter was that there are two ways of being a substrate: either as a possessor of thisness, as the animal is a substrate for its properties, or as a matter is a substrate for the actuality. Aristotle denies that the definition species or secondary substance animal is itself an animal. This need not seem particularly noteworthy, but it has important implications for a problem in Plato's theory of forms that Aristotle's theory of inherent or subsistent forms, definitions, species, or secondary substances neatly avoids. It is mentioned actually in the final sentence as the problem of the third man. And the problem of the third man we can find in 1039a here, where he will say, once you demur at that, you have no end of difficulties, not the least the third man. What is the problem of the third man? 1039a. Plato's forms are supposed to explain the properties of particular things in the constantly changing perceivable world of becoming. The things we experience in sensation are said to participate in or imitate ideal forms in the rationally knowable, unchanging world of being. Plato is aware of the problem, which he discusses at length in his dialogue, the Parmenides. Particular flesh and blood men are men rather than horses, according to Plato, because they imitate or participate in the ideal form of man. We might designate all Platonic forms by capitalizing the term, in this case, as man. But if an individual man imitates or participates in the ideal form of man, then a man and man are, in a more generic sense, both men. This can only be true, according to Plato's theory, by virtue of all men and man imitating or participating in a yet higher ideal form of man. These we might distinguish from both men and man as the third man. So, a man participates in the form of man, an individual man, and the first order form of man participate in the higher order form of man. The higher order form of man is the third man. The commitment to higher and higher order Platonic forms of man must go on indefinitely. We could continue to distinguish them terminologically in further ways as needed, but by supposing that there's even so much as the first order ideal form man, Plato's theory of forms appears to be committed to an indefinite regress of ideal forms of successively higher orders of forms, from men to man to the third man, and so on and on and on without limit. The trouble is that by allowing any forms at all, Plato seems to be stuck with unlimitedly many higher and higher order forms. Yet at most it is only the first order form man that appears to serve any useful explanatory purpose in Plato's theory if we want to understand why all things of a certain kind are men. The Platonic form of man is thereby supposed to unlock the mystery of the nature of man. Plato, unfortunately, is stuck in an endless regress of forms once he admits the existence of a first order form of anything. The trouble is not only the wild proliferation of forms, but the fact that none of the higher order forms after the first order fulfills any explanatory purpose in Plato's metaphysics. The implication is that Plato's theory of forms is overcommitted to many ideal forms that do not work to earn their keep. As a result, Plato's theory of forms appears to violate the principle of Occam's razor, never to multiply entities beyond explanatory necessity. This is a principle accepted even in Aristotle's time, although Aristotle, for obvious reasons, could never have referred to it as such. The aesthetic criterion for choice among competing theories that Occam's razor expresses is popularly formalized from its suggestive statement in the writings of the 14th century anti-Platonist thinker William of Ockham. Occam's dictum, entia non sunt multiplicanda praeter necessitatem. The problem is that Plato's theory engenders an indefinite hierarchy of ideal forms, all of which are supposed to be real existent entities, but for which, beyond the first level forms such as that of man, there's no explanatory justification. Aristotle's doctrine of inherent or indwelling secondary substances avoids the regress of forms in Plato's metaphysics. Aristotle's definition, species or secondary substances form with a small letter F do not exist as real entities. They cannot exist independently in a Platonic heaven, but subsist only insofar as they inhere in the primary substances that they define and to which they give specific definitions and forms. Since Aristotle's secondary substances do not exist on their own, we do not have to worry that they might be multiplying indefinitely behind our backs with no explanatory payoff. Maybe it's also nice, if you're interested, to read the paragraph before 10, this one, from the on page 217 from this section until here, the third man. There is no cause in Aristotle's metaphysics for thinking that there are any secondary substances other than those inhering in the primary substances they define. They provide no basis for proceeding to any higher order of forms in a hierarchy of nonsensibles as the secondary, tertiary, and so on definitions of primary, secondary, tertiary, and so on substances. When Aristotle remarks that the definition, species, or secondary substances animal is not itself an animal, he cuts off any way to produce a third man and spares his metaphysics of substance the problem of the third man that affects Plato's theory of forms. Aristotle, nevertheless, maintains that the formal definitional component of primary substances, sorry if I'm moving it very fast, in which they inhere, secondary substances are immovable and separable from the world of sensible things in much the same that formal realists such as Plato maintains. Aristotle adds this explanation to his metaphysics of inherent secondary substances, which we will find in 1069. Now you understand why I have to do it very fast, because I have to go to 1069 from 1039 a while ago. So Let's look at 1069A. Up, up, up. I went beyond. That's 1070 already. So let's look at it's this. Up, up, down. There. It is in green font. Now there are three substances, of which one sort is sensible, of which the one is eternal, the other destructible. This substance, that of plants and animals, is universally acknowledged, and we must grasp its elements and decide whether they are one or many. And B, the other is unmoved. This substance is sometimes asserted to be separable. Some philosophers divide it into two, while others assign both forms and mathematicals to the same nature, and still others only admit mathematicals from this group. Now, to I, one sort is sensible and eternal, and the other destructible, belongs to the study of nature, while B, the other is unmoved, belong to another study, assuming that they have no principle in common. At any rate, sensible substances is susceptible to change. Now, change is from opposites of the intermediate, and not from all opposites, but from contraries. So there must necessarily be some underlying thing changing into the contrary state, since the contraries themselves do not change. There, that's the important quote. Now, I hope this clarified how, as I promised at the beginning of the lecture, how Aristotle's concept of secondary substances as the unmoved, for example, is in fact a solution to Plato's definition of the third man. If you like this type of content, please click, share, like, and subscribe to the YouTube channel Samo't sa Simula to keep this channel moving. Thank you very much.